How do you read it then, Liam? Is it good for the economy?
There's certainly a lot of political changes happening now. I think that Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election, which the Tories just about won because of local opposition to Sadiq Khan's ULEZ ultra-low emission zone, it kind of unearthed a huge debate that's been going on just outside the mainstream, but certainly on government backbenches. Look, the main problem we've got is that oil and gas from the North Sea is receding. We've gone down from over 2.5, almost 3 million barrels of oil and gas equivalent a day in the year 2000 to around 1 million now, and yet we're using a lot more oil and gas. And oil and gas, it still accounts for 3/4 of our electricity, of our total energy, including electricity, transport, heating and so on. And it's much better for the environment, as Rishi Sunak says, to produce our own oil and gas if we're going to need oil and gas, rather than importing it. If we import LNG, liquefied natural gas from America, you have to get the gas in America, you have to turn it into a liquid, put it on a diesel ship, 3,500 miles across the Atlantic, re-gasify it. It uses 3 times more carbon than just drilling our own gas in the North Sea.
Do we need to do this at all?
Well,
because
OK.
It's being branded a reckless decision.
OK, well, people use words, but do they really stack up with reality? I repeat, 3/4 of our energy that we currently use in this country is oil and gas, and by the end of 2030 it will still be half. And that's according to the head of the Climate Change Commission, which is the government's own kind of in-house environmental consultancy. So everyone around the world realises we're going to need oil and gas for a long time, even though we're going to be using less and less and less oil and gas. But it's going to take years to unravel this completely. And have a look at this. Maybe this is what readers and listeners and viewers really want to know. Let's have a look at this graphic here. These numbers are really hard to find, but I dug them out over the weekend when I was writing a newspaper column. These are residential end-user electricity prices, right, in June 2023. That thing on the right, that's just it's euros per kilowatt hour. But it's a bit complicated, but you can get the idea. So in the UK, we are paying 45 euros roughly per kilowatt hour for our residential electricity. Look at the numbers in France, where they've got lots of nuclear, 27 euros. Spain, 20 euros. Germany, of course, have closed down all their nuclear, and they're heavily reliant on Russian gas, so they're suffering. But even they're cheaper than us. And look at the US, 18.9 euros per kilowatt hour. So we are paying the EU average, by the way, is about 25 euros. So we are paying hugely more for our electricity, even though we've got all these renewables. And the reason is that when you use lots of renewables, you have to have these gas-fired power stations just sitting there on standby, so you can use them on the days and even weeks when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And that particularly happens in winter, when demand for energy is very, very high. So what's going on here is, back in the Cameron days, the Tories said, go vote blue, go get green, because they were trying to take votes off the Lib Dems, frankly. Now the Tories' real election battle is in the Red Wall, and they're going up against Labour voters. And a lot of Labour voters, traditional Labour voters, they really don't like this net zero stuff at all, because they feel they're the poorer, more vulnerable households that are going to have to pay. That's why the likes of the GMB, a huge union, our third biggest union, hugely against Keir Starmer banning licences for new North Sea oil and gas. The same with Unite, the second biggest union in the country. So this isn't straightforward at all. You're now getting splits in the Labour Party and indeed in the Tory Party. You just read out something there from Chris Skidmore. He's a former minister, former high flyer. A lot of younger Tories want this net zero stuff. So a lot of people say, oh, it's political splits, they don't know what we're doing. What we're really seeing here, for the first time in a long time, and I think GB News has helped to bring this about, is a proper debate. Not necessarily about, yes, we're going to move away from oil and gas. Clearly we are. But how we do it, and most importantly, who pays?
We think that perhaps in the next 50 minutes we may hear that the layoff, if you like, is carbon capture technology, that's how he's going to balance the books on the environment. But there's another debate on what type of carbon capture technology and whether you can use that to actually generate, rather than just sticking the stuff in the ground.
So what carbon capture technology is, to explain, is when you generate fossil fuels and you burn fossil fuels, the carbon that's emitted, you then bury it in old oil and gas fields in the North Sea, below the seabed. and there are major carbon capture facilities being built in Tyneside and Teesside.
This is where the argument the jobs are going to come.
That's right, and you do get jobs from those. Some environmentalists would say, just to be completely fair, that carbon capture is just an excuse for continuing to use fossil fuels. It's a way of continuing to use fossil fuels. I would say, as an analyst, an Ofcom regulated analyst, I would say that actually it's clear we are going to need oil and gas for quite a few years. Even the Climate Change Commission says that, and that's what the Tories are talking about. So if you are going to try and, make that less damaging for the environment, then carbon capture could help.
Well, given that, a lot of people will be scratching their heads when we hear all this. Why is he then saying, no, it's full speed ahead on the 2030 ban on diesel and petrol cars?
Because
it seems that,
I think the political reality, he doesn't want to frighten the horses too much. He's got the Tory reform group, the so-called One Nation Tories, and we just heard from Chris Skidmore there, who's, he's never going to get into another Sunak government, right? So maybe he thinks they're going to lose the next election, I don't know. So you've got splits in the Tory party. I would chance my arm here, though, Mark. I would say I don't think that 2030 ban will survive. I think the technological reality is that the car-making industry across the world just isn't ready for it.
Just can't get them made in time.
At the moment, just to be clear, the law is that by 2030 you can't buy a new petrol or diesel car in the UK. You can still buy second-hand petrol and diesel cars and classic cars and vintage cars and all the rest of it, but you can't buy a new petrol and diesel car in the UK by 2030. Germany have shifted that to 2035. I think we will end up doing that now.
But that could be bad for business, couldn't it? I mean, what with the Tata announcement, investing in the battery plant, they're working towards 2030. We're suddenly backtracking.
They're working for 2030 in order to get them to invest in that plant. Having failed to get anyone to invest in any of these gigafactories for years, we've had to bung them £500 million. So what's worse for business? Not building a gigafactory or closing down the main way that we transport stuff around the country? There are many trade-offs here. And again, what viewers and listeners can hear and see right now, suddenly we've got a debate. Suddenly people like me are allowed to say, oh, you know what, there might be a problem if we do this, without being cancelled as some kind of, mad anti-environmental lunatic. I'm not at all. I want us to move away from oil and gas. I just understand how difficult it's going to be.
So don't frighten the horses, or maybe just buy a horse. Either one.
Buy a horse.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much for that.